Dr. Ed Feser recently commented on new atheism and why it has crumbled, why it was popular, but also why it has crumbled in recent years. This is something that I've been so happy to see. I grew up when new atheism was like the thing. But him commenting on this is really insightful, and this actually helps, especially for Christians, let alone atheists, to understand going forward a better way for discourse to happen, a better way to look at differences in viewpoints. This is really helpful stuff here, and also it's helpful for Christians to understand how to address people. You don't always have to address them one way. It can all be godly, but different methods should be employed. It's actually very helpful and probably the thing that killed new atheism, at least in part. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, consider supporting on Patreon. Let's get into it.
If they pay attention to the way I deal with critics and with public figures like Dawkins or what have you, that if I'm aggressive in my responses to them, it's because they've been aggressive first, either with me or with other people. And that's certainly the case with the new atheists. So the tone that I took in The Last Superstition, which is very different from the tone I take in other books like Five Proofs of the Existence of God or Aquinas, where it's a much more kind of, academic style, or it's a more inoffensive style. It's not, polemical or aggressive, what have you. But The Last Superstition definitely is aggressive. But that was deliberate. The reason I took that approach was that the new atheist movement, which is pretty much dead now, but at the time it seemed like, this was a big thing and it was gonna have staying power. I would say the bulk of the argumentational force that new atheist writers had, Harris, Hitchens, Dawkins, Dennett, and so on, was due to their self-confidence and their bluster and their own obnoxiousness. And it had very little to do with intellectual content, because the intellectual content was minimal.
So what he's addressing first is he, I guess, had received criticism for the way in which he would speak or argue against an atheist in his writings and in his debates and stuff like that. And he would get criticism from Christians about ridiculing some of those ideas. And what he says is, look, sometimes you should ridicule. Sometimes, especially with the way the new atheists were, Richard Dawkins, the way he still is, Christopher Hitchens and others, what they were really good at was they were just filled with slogans. Their sloganeering was incredible. Their anecdotes were incredible. Christopher Hitchens in particular, his just anecdotes or slogans, little sayings that would stick in your brain, they were incredible. The problem is, though, and again, I mean this respectfully, and people are recognizing this now, the problem is those slogans were actually really empty and quite dumb in many ways. They weren't real arguments. They were just appeals to emotion sometimes, which is very ironic because that's often what they would claim that we, the religious people, do. And so he's saying sometimes there is appropriate territory to ridicule something, particularly when they come out guns a-blazing, disrespectful, and ridiculing to you. You should show, hold on. I'm not going to hear your ridicule and then take you real seriously and pretend like your ridicule is even remotely justified. If anything, ridicule in the other direction is justified, and here is why.
As I think I demonstrate in that book.
And it's also worth noting, God ridicules in the Bible. There is ridicule throughout the scriptures. Again, there's a right way to do it. Shouldn't always be ridicule, but that's definitely something that needs to be said.
Elsewhere, the arguments are they're really bad. They're ill-informed. They're sophomoric. And it doesn't take a lot of work to shoot down the arguments. But I think a lot of people were drawn to it, or a lot of people maybe who weren't drawn to it were nevertheless intimidated by it because of the enormous self-confidence that these guys had. And that goes a long way rhetorically. If you're extremely self-confident and you're extremely contemptuous of a certain point of view, then even people who are sympathetic at that point of view can feel worried that, well, I don't know, maybe there's something wrong with me. These guys are smart and they're really confident in dismissing it. Maybe there's something wrong with me, even if I don't see the force of their arguments.
That is so true. There are a lot of people that would see Richard Dawkins speak so confidently about how ridiculous, bogus, nonsense it is to even believe that there is a God, let alone the God of the Bible. And they go, oh, wow. I mean, this smart guy who has so much education, surely he feels this way for a good reason. And even though I can't understand his arguments or something like that, either that really concerns me or I'm just going to kind of get on his side because look at how certain he seems to be and he's so smart. They really prey upon people who know less than them. Not necessarily, and that doesn't make them right, but they just prey on being intellectually superior and also extremely confident. And that caused a lot of people to just follow them and believe in them. And one good example of this, not an atheist, but kind of similar in this vein, is Billy Carson. This is exactly what he has employed on a lot of people for a while now.
So my formula in writing that book was to present superior intellectual firepower with equal and opposite rhetorical force. Because the intellectual firepower by itself would be sufficient to refute their arguments, but it would not be sufficient with at least many readers to refute the attraction of those arguments. Because, you know, if Dawkins says something stupid about Aquinas' 5 ways, and then you point out how he's being stupid, some readers will say, okay, yeah, Dawkins is just wrong about this and move on. But a lot of readers will think, yeah, but he's Richard Dawkins and he's really smart. And he's so confident. I mean, there must be something to it.
And he has an English accent.
He's got an English accent, right? There's got to be something there, right? Whereas when you treat him with a kind of ridicule with which he treats others, it brings him down a peg rhetorically.
Yes, and actually, I didn't realize I was doing this, but I've done so many videos on Richard Dawkins and guys like Bill Maher as well. They're both in the same vein in terms of how they talk about religion in this ridiculing aspect. I ridicule them quite frequently on my channel. They're some of the people that I bring up the most because, and I've said this, they absolutely deserve it. Bill Maher deserves it. Richard Dawkins deserves it. But the hearers need it. You see, this isn't me making an appeal for disrespect of a person as much as disrespect of a person's viewpoint and argument. Sometimes, and this is the point that he's making, sometimes we need to go beyond, here is why this idea is correct, and say, here is why this idea is, and I'm about to use a word that is a bad word in some circles, so if you have a small child, cover their ears. This is why, not just this is why this idea is wrong, but this is why this idea is stupid. This is ridiculous. This is impossible to ever be used in the idea of coherence and consistency or an accurate depiction of religion. This is why this is absolute bogus nonsense, and you shouldn't believe it for even a second. There is so much room to do that too. You see, again, that is not me being a disrespectful, unchristlike person. For God even did this stuff himself. There are situations like where in 1 Kings chapter 18, Elijah's before the prophets of Baal, and they're crying out to their false god, and they're cutting themselves. And then he says, "Where's your God at? Is he on a trip? Is he asleep? Why isn't he answering your call?" He's ridiculing this idea. Was he being wrong in that situation? No, these were murderous idolaters who were oppressing people. Their God, they needed more than just, from Elijah, the people needed more than just, here are 4 logical reasons why you shouldn't believe in Baal. What the world needed was, let me prove to you that believing in Baal is stupid. Don't do it. Again, there is room for this. And I think a lot of the times Christians are so scared of being disrespectful, and we should be concerned about being disrespectful, but sometimes it's to a fault where we stop ridiculing the ideas of those who routinely and consistently ridicule Christianity. Just rhetorically, we should sometimes, in an appropriate way, go beyond that. That's the case that I'm making. If you're a Christian, let me know what you think, but I think that this actually is a really solid point that he's making here.
And so that was deliberate, and I think justified on the same principle that, people say, well, you don't have to be so mean in response to them, And I'd say, well, that's like telling police they shouldn't shoot back at bank robbers who are shooting at them, right? Sometimes you need equal and opposite force to repel someone who's being aggressive.
Again, sometimes, not every time. I don't always return real fiery with anyone who just is rude to me. Recently, someone called me like a ravenous wolf, false prophet in the YouTube comments, and I reacted to that, and I wasn't like all disrespectful and stuff or anything like that. Sometimes it's just not needed, but sometimes it is needed. That's the point that I'm making.
To use your analogy about defending your mother, if someone's questioning your mother, you might question them. If they start throwing shots at your mother or swinging at your mother, then you
exactly,
a different level of force might be required.
Right.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So you certainly weren't caught up in the kind of emotion of the New Atheist movement, because obviously you thought through this, you were teaching this. So what was it like for you to sort of look on at all these people as they began to maybe move towards atheism or begin to question their belief in God, when you presumably could see a lot clearer?
Yeah. Annoyance more than anything else. A lot of the things I write because I'm annoyed. And why am I annoyed? because I see problems with things that are being said that should be, to me, it seems should be obvious and no one's pointing them out. The same thing was true of the last superstition. The way people like Dawkins and Harris and Hitchens and so on were being treated, I just thought no one was saying what had to be said. I mean, you had people maybe who were being aggressive with them, but with arguments that, to my mind, weren't really the best arguments, weren't really taking things as deep as they needed to take them. You had other people who maybe were saying things closer to what I thought needed to be said, but in too irenic a spirit, maybe treating them as, if you treat a bully as if he were just a guy down the bar from you at the pub and you're having a conversation, and you treat him in a friendly way and he's still obnoxious to you, and you try to be friendly and he doubles down on his obnoxiousness. Okay, you got to stop, playing nice with him. You got to take the kid gloves off. So to me, no one was doing what needed to be done. You needed again, as I say, the superior intellectual firepower, which to my mind means the classical tradition in philosophy and theology. It means, arguments that have their roots in Platonism and Aristotelianism were brought to a kind of perfection for the day of Aquinas, would have been updated since Aquinas' time because, he was writing in a context when the scientific examples he might have used, were good for his time, but not for ours. So you need kind of an updated presentation of that classical tradition.
Sometimes you can just calmly and very diplomatically reason through stuff with people, but in situations like these very consistently disrespectful, ridiculing people of Christianity, sometimes you just have to go scorched earth on them. Again, it's not like do something overtly unchristlike or something like that, but sometimes you just have to take a flamethrower and ridicule and again, ridicule the point, ridicule the idea. Like, I'm not saying make fun of Richard Dawkins' appearance or something like that, but sometimes you do have to go all out and strongly oppose something in every form of it, because it is such a problem. And again, the people who are proponents of it, when you think about what the viewers see, when the viewers see Richard Dawkins mocking and ridiculing Christianity and talking about it all day long, like it is the most ridiculous thing ever to even think about believing in a God. And then you have like a guy like me, or let's just say like a respectable guy like Ed Feser, but in like the most like calm version of him where he goes, well, I kind of like a Stephen C. Meyer kind of guy, who I love. I disagree with that for reason number one, and I think that claim is a little unfounded. Reason number two, and reason number three, I think when you look at that just on a rhetorical level, so many people are going to go look at the confidence with which Richard Dawkins makes his points. Look at how strongly he's willing to speak about it. Then you have all these guys who say that they believe in God, but they're so careful, they're scared, they're diplomatic about it. You see, when you don't match the rhetorical, what's coming at you rhetorically sometimes, it's just on a visual optics level, it's going to cause people to subconsciously at least say, I don't think this guy's right. He barely even seems confident about the point that he's making. So you should speak rhetorically about God in the way that best suits the situation. And when you're talking about a Richard Dawkins kind of guy or to a Richard Dawkins kind of guy, just to always take his ridicule and the disrespect of God and the disrespect of your belief and just treat that like it's like equal to yours, or to treat that like it's totally valid and fine and not ridicule it back, is just bad tactics. It's just bad rhetoric. It's just bad debating. It's bad argumentation. Sometimes you have to point to people, no, this isn't just wrong. This is absolutely insane. And thankfully, people started to do that. And that's why those guys have kind of faded off into the sunset, and they're not as big as they once were. And guys like Alex O'Connor are on the scene and being the biggest kinds of atheists that the world has here. Alex O'Connor, who is extremely respectful of Christianity and religion. He is like the most formidable atheist that we have, I would say, in the world today, because of the tenor in which he approaches it. And also he's much more refreshed in terms of his arguments, atheist, and someone who opposes himself to God. So I don't ever like ridicule Alex O'Connor or the way I do with Richard Dawkins or Bill Maher. They're completely different people, and they should be treated differently, and their arguments also are quite different as well. So let me know what you think about that though. I'm not advocating for disrespect. What we are advocating for is for sometimes Christians to understand not only can they should take the gloves off and get more direct about this. Again, there's levels to this. You got to use your judgment. You got to be wise in this. Wise as serpents, harmless as doves, as Jesus said. But at the same time, sometimes you got to take the gloves off, and you've got to be more vicious with it in certain specific situations, because that's what it calls for. Jesus wanted to gather people together sometimes as a nursing hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but sometimes also Jesus flipped those tables over. So we've got to be Christians who are, with judgment, with wisdom, willing to go however we need to go to proceed in order for the truth to be let out. So just think about it. Let me know what you think. Maybe that's crazy. I'm very curious about what Christians have to say about this, but I think it's time that every Christian recognize that sometimes we got to really step it up a little bit. We got to step it up and be more willing to defend our God and the truth within Him. But let me know what you think. Again, I love you so much. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, consider supporting on Patreon. God willing, I'll talk to you soon. Take care. Goodbye.